But what is the question exactly? Do you want us to comment on here? Please repeat the question.
How do you balance the imperative for data-driven fintech solutions with the responsibility to safeguard users' privacy, especially considering the potential impact on vulnerable socio-economic groups?
Okay. Social. I think it's not so much relevant to us. Probably, she can be comment if it's relevant for him. It's not so relevant for decent products because see, ultimately we're not consumer facing. Like we do not directly interact with consumers. Many of you would use our services, but you would not even know that we exist, right? That's the magic of being in the backend. So from that perspective, the way we look at vulnerable economic groups, which I believe is the context of the question, which is like groups that are in danger, right? In a minority, in a particular sector, in a particular country. How do you think about their inclusion, right? So we are agnostic to the kind of companies that use us, right? There are neobanks that use us. Some of you might have heard of FanPay. Many of you have heard of FanPay? The team neobank? Yeah. They are one of our customers, right? Now, it's a very niche category if you look at 5 years ago. Right? Now, obviously, there are many Canadian neobanks. FanPay being the largest in India. Right? So, from a company perspective, we are agnostic to the kind of, I would say, groups that they're serving, which could be religiously specific, which could be country specific, which could be gender specific, whatever, right? So we don't really think about like serving a specific group, or serving one specific minority in a country, if I were to put it that way. So yeah, but our apps do, right? So our customers do for sure, and many of them are serving minorities. Like there are companies which we serve which are just building minorities. Like if some of you become NRI at a certain point in your life, you'll realize NRI banking is even more complex. Right? I mean, like you think banking is painful, ask an NRI how painful it is for them. Right? Just banking in India. So those kind of groups also exist, right? But yeah, as I said, like not directly, like we're not directly attacking those consumers. Yeah.
It's very. How many of you know what is India Stack? Anybody knows? No? India Stack? No, you guys know about it. Yeah. You already use it, right? I mean, look, Aadhaar is part of identity layer of India Stack. Then you have the second layer, which is your UPI, which you do money transfer to your friends. You go in restaurants. I don't know. I'm sure you tried to restaurants outside IIT Bombay here. And the third layer, which is an important layer, is called consent layer in India Stack. Now, to answer your question, what is happening is you realize that as we are starting to get a lot of data about consumers, the consumer should remain the owner of the data. It's not the institutions. There's always a debate. People say, hey, bank has a lot of data, but bank, which it creates its own data, is something which they can call their own data. But a consumer information, which is personally identified information, is still owned by the consumer, right? So there is something called a consent layer in India Stack, and I'm giving you just one example. The similar layer exists across different countries also. So what does this consent layer do? Is a very simple thing that it allows the consumer to choose between if you want to share a particular data with an institution or not. So the process works like this. Let's say you apply for a credit card, and American Express or any of these guys who want your information. The information could be personally identified information, could be information about income, what kind of taxes you filed, and all of that. Right? The user, the consumer who is applying for that, will get a request saying, "Do you approve?" Right? In India, it is all OTP driven, but outside India, it is like it comes on an app where you have to say consent, yes, no, and then once you give that consent, there is an audit trail for capturing it. Right? So there are a lot of new technologies which have come in to address this consent layer. Right? There is, of course, we have seen a lot of solutions on blockchain where there is security-wise you managing the data, who's consuming the data, and the data has to be consumed in a context. So if I give this data in the context of application of a credit card, it should not be used for taking a utility connection on that, right? So there is this whole mechanism around consent, and there is Samati.org which is driving that in India. Similarly, similar mechanisms exist outside India, right? You have SigPass, which offers you an opportunity to provide the consent, right? So I mean, if you apply for a credit card, you could get a credit card in a day's time, right? Delivered to your doorsteps. That is as fast you can move because of this consent layer. But you can see that open data, which is what Decentro promotes, and it is globally one of the main transformation agents for what you see is happening, is also combined with the user data protection acts, which have to come into play. So both of them go hand in hand. You can't just say on one side that yes, we'll push open data, but I will not protect the consumer rights, right? So both acts go together, and that's where some of the countries where it is taking a lot more time. And now US has also adopted open banking, but they have a very strong consumer protection. Similarly, multiple other countries who are coming up with open information, open exchange, they are pushing forward for the consumer acts, right? But the central mechanism to this for executing how consumers will retain their rights is through the consent mechanism. And that is why India, how many of you know that India's Aadhaar is going to be replicated across multiple countries? Do you know which country? Do you know which country? No? So it's not going to be exactly the same replication, but India Aadhaar infrastructure would be also leveraged in Sri Lanka, right? Of course, they will bring their own customization, but same thing with UPI. Government of India is now enabling these platforms which are so successful, and we are becoming exporters at the government level of this digital public infrastructure, or you can call it may become a private infrastructure in some cases, but it is being exported. So it's a very proud moment for us to know this. And similarly, the consent layer will also get replicated as you see.
So, as someone leading a company with a global footprint, how do you see the fintech boom impacting the socio-economic gaps on a global scale? And what steps can be taken to ensure a more equitable distribution of its benefits?
I think Shrikant already covered some points on this, but one of the key things which is already happening is because of export of technology, right? So UPI is a good example there. I think some of you might have read the news of Pay Now, which is the UPI equivalent in Singapore, becoming interoperable with UPI. Right? So what that really means is, and I tried to tell you, if you travel to Singapore as one starting country, you can use your existing UPI scanner and scan the QR code in that country, and you can pay from your Indian account. Right? So that's one great example of how fintech is really crossing borders. And obviously there's a lot of innovation that has to happen, a lot of collaboration that has to happen for this to really come into effect. For example, in this case, NPCI, which is the key body that has developed UPI and regulates UPI right now, has to work closely with the corresponding developer or the company in that country. Similar collaborations happening across other countries as well, like Vietnam is also thinking of something similar. But yeah, I think it's something, one of the key things that you can, I would say, look at starting point is just the basic level of fintech, money movement level APIs, right? Going cross-border, or different countries around it. Right? That's one level of impact. The second level of impact is data becoming uniform in nature. Right? So what that means is your data models are becoming standardized to that level where, let's say, you develop a lending model in India, you can actually take that same lending model into the next developing country, which is similar to India, like could be Indonesia, could be Vietnam. Do some tweaks, obviously, like for example, Aadhaar will become XYZ in that country, but the model will remain the same. Right? So that's another example of how fintech infrastructure or fintech in general can have a global impact.
Thank you for your experiences, sir. Can we have an interactive session with the audience?
Absolutely.
Anyone is having any doubts?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. Is there a mic? Should I speak? Just scream it up. It's all right. I'll speak up. You mentioned blockchain. I wanted to know a little bit about decentralized finance and how does that connect to decentral, and do you see that being implemented in India to bridge the economic divide?
Sure. So actually, the name decentral is it's created to more like mystify the consumer. It actually does not have any DeFi. Like we don't do DeFi at all. But yes, the original idea when the company started like 3.5 years ago was to have DeFi. That's how the name came in. But the name has stuck ever since. So I did not think of changing it just to make it like slightly mischievous for the consumers, because we don't need the consumers. So I want to keep it fun for them. But yeah, coming to the question of DeFi in India, I think it's early days primarily because I think the key problems with blockchain has always been the cost. Like it's so expensive, like especially if you're running a private blockchain. So I personally I've been a developer as well earlier, and I still write code from time to time, but just the aspect of running a private blockchain on a network is still extremely expensive, right? Unless that goes down, like unless you're able to bring it to the level of say an AWS, right, to the regular cloud provider, it's not going to take off, right? At a mass level, it can take off at a B2B level or maybe a large corporate level which is able to spend, say a few $1,000s, but it will not take off at the consumer level. That's my thought on DeFi, specifically in the Asian countries. But there is a counter item which is you can say change the technology itself, like say instead of private blockchain, use a smarter version of public blockchain. Right? So for example, Ripple. Right? Ripple is that one of those promising DeFi tech which actually is trying to make cross-border much more seamless. It's already succeeded to some level. There are some experiments and countries have already tried. But again, there are different challenges when you go there because then you have to make sure that different countries adopt that technology, right? So I would say there's one tech level challenge, and then the second is the collaborative or the political challenge.
I can try to address it slightly differently. You think about internet. Internet, the way it is created is that it lacks one of the very important layers, which is called trust layer. So by default, when I am interacting with someone, whether it's an individual or an entity or any form of organization, I don't have confirmation about the trust on the other side, right? And that needs to be created externally in the current form of internet. Right? So one of the reasons why blockchain is important for the growth of internet is because it has an inbuilt trust layer. Right? You have a lot more kind of trust about the underlying data. Of course, the trust on the identity is still something which you need to embed in that. Right? And now coming back to, I don't want to look at the crystal ball and tell you where the things could be about blockchain. It has been slower than what it is expected to be from, let's say, 2018, 2019, and I think at one point in time China invested heavily on blockchain. They still do, and I think India lacks a lot of investment in blockchain, at least at the public infrastructure level. They were looking at moving Aadhaar to blockchain, and I think there are a couple of other initiatives which are coming in. But I would just mention one very, very strong sector where you would see, or you are seeing a lot of traction, is the virtualization of assets. And that could be an area where you would virtualize the real estate, you could virtualize many other forms of physical assets, and then it creates liquidity in the market for organizations. And that could be a good opportunity for India to tap into. To start with the DeFi appeal. But still, for the other sectors, there is going to be some challenge, some learning curve in terms of whether I choose a centralized or a decentralized solution. And You shouldn't choose any solution just because the technology is great. You should choose a solution because it is benefiting the user. And I think blockchain may win in some scenarios, but right now it is not a mandatory solution for many of the tech-enabled solutions.
Considering how the fintech is happening, can you talk about how you guys started with the journey and the regulatory nature, how you guys navigated? Because I think you guys just got the in-principle approval for the ETC. So, as a startup, what are the options that we can consider, and what are the, if there are partnerships, something like that we can think about?
Sure, that's a very broad question. But so first thing is, what kind of a fintech do you really want to do? Right? So fintech is so broad, and so many things in fintech. Right? You can do a card management system, you can do payment system like us, right? And each of them have their own pros and cons. I think our thesis was very simple, and this came from my own personal pain points in the previous company, which is just the process of integrating with a bank is so painful. Right? If you look at examples that I took of companies like FamPay, if you look at their journeys, like how long did they take to launch the first level of the product, right? It is in months, it's not in weeks or days, right? And the reason it is in months is because of that, right? And I don't see banks doing anything to change it, right? Interestingly, because it's not in the top priority list, right? Banks have always been great custodians of capital and great custodians of compliance. That's all they do, and I think that's what they should do. Nothing else. When banks start becoming tech providers themselves, they do a really shoddy job of that. Like that was one of the theses we realized, and we realized it very early, and it is true to date. Which is where the whole banking as a service sector came into play. Right? Like, across the world, banking as a service sector came just because of this fact. Their banks are not doing a good job, right? So I think you first have to realize the pain point, or first you have to realize one fact which is true, and it is true across years, right? Even better if it is true across decades, because that means there is a problem to solve, right? That's number one. So once you identify that fact or that problem, then you need to start thinking, okay, within this, what can I do? Right? So can you pick one part where you're good at, right, and you feel really strong about it, and there's a large market for that, right? So banking, of course, banking infrastructure qualifies everything in that for me. But within banking infrastructure, then I chose payments because I was more qualified for payments. And second, I also feel cards infrastructure, or say for example, the core banking system, requires a much, I would say, longer sales process. Right? So due to those factors, we went into this. So that's specific to Central. Then coming to regulatory, I think once you're done with this second part, first part and the second part of the process, the third part is you have to take a call on, do you want to be a pure software player, like a technology provider, or do you actually want to handle the complexities of the regulation and say own the money flow? If you do own the money flow, the benefit is your margins will be substantial because you are the ones actually sitting inside the money flow, just like a big gateway or big processor. But yes, the downside is you have to deal with the regulator, right? And I think it is ultimately in good sense because you're dealing with people's money and you can't mess around with people's money. So we chose the latter primarily because we are playing a longer game, and we feel that just being a tech player, you will get squeezed from both sides. Like you'll get squeezed from the customer and you'll get squeezed from the underlying processor in terms of margins. So the deeper you go in the stack, the better your value box. That's, I would say those 3 steps, the way you can think of navigating a fintech problem and how to arrive at the final question of whether you want to be regulated or not. Yeah.
Sir, as you told, digital open web is a nice option for IDEX. So, are there any cyber threat or any cyber attack? If happening, then how they are preventing and what precautions they are taking?
Whether we adopt technology the digital bank level or we stay here wherever we are, there is going to be cyber attack, right? I mean, it's a reality of life. At whatever stage, whether you are very advanced in technology versus you are not advanced, you are going to face these challenges, right? Of course, there are many organizations now. When we talk about open banking, one of the main challenges we faced with a lot of chief information security officers is they said, look, I'm opening up my data, right, to a third party, and I'm increasing the risk of getting hacked, right, or my data being stolen on this. So you have to really talk to them, saying, that it's not that somebody is going to steal your data, right, and there is technology available which is like a firewall which allows you to, manufacture, to understand, what kind of threats are there, whether these kind of injections which happen through the actual message and all of that, right? So there is a lot of technology which is developed for defending that. So that's more on the open banking. On the digital banking, I would say that I was involved in the DBS DigiBank launch, right, in 2014-15 when DBS launched. So this was in Singapore. When DBS was decided to launch this app to India and China, they didn't want to cannibalize their Singapore market. They said, look, let's first try to launch this. And you have to really define these architectures. So I was reading the architecture in terms of how multiple layers, like the mobile app layer, the interim layer, and when open banking was not that popular in 2014-15, but still, they wanted to come up with a list of APIs which are available in future, right? So DBS was quite futuristic about it. So if you do the designs with the security in mind, it's not a post facto. It is like you have to start thinking about it early on, right? But there is no alternative to it, right? Even if you just choose to keep your existing infrastructure, a lot of software companies do not provide support after a while to the old software. So you have to, there is no way that you can hold on to the older software. You can say, we will not go to cloud. You will have to go. And there are many facilities, features which are made available by a lot of cloud providers which allow you to manage these. There are ready stacks available, right? And Rohit and I, we were discussing how the new banking platforms are coming in. So where you don't need to have multiple components stitched together by the bank, but you can actually have like one plug and play stack where you can launch the bank immediately, provided you have the license yourself. So there are many technologies, but then this is not a problem related to security, is not a problem related to purely technology. It is all about how you are addressing that as part of your journey. It is a boardroom discussion today, so you should not ignore it, right? And you have to have. That's why you see a lot of companies in information security domain, they are doing so well, because that's where you need to protect the digital assets of the company.
So it's time to wrap up the session. This is an insightful session, sir. On the behalf of all the students, we would like to show our gratitude to both of you from our side.